Hello, and welcome to the Cinemaholics podcast. I'm your host, not as always, Julia Tatey. John and Will moved aside from the podcast this week so that a few ladies can step in to take care of business. Joining me today is a lady who is always cooking up juicy takes and reviews at The Playlist or the LA Times. It's Kimber Myers.
Hello.
Hi, Kimber. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I am just good. I'm ready to take over the town with you.
We've got some crimes cooking in here.
Oh, yeah, we do. All right, so let's get into it. This week, Kimber and I are talking about The Kitchen, the latest vehicle for stars Tiffany Haddish, Elizabeth Moss, and Oscar nominee Melissa McCarthy. Kimber, what do the Cinemaholic listeners need to know about The Kitchen? When did it come out? Who's directing it? What's the story? Give me everything I need to know.
Yeah, so The Kitchen was released on Friday, August 9th, so right when we are recording. And it is it's a crime film set in the late 70s in New York City, specifically a neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen, hence the name. And it's based on a comic book series, I guess a mini-series by Ollie Masters and Ming Doyle. And it's about the wives of New York gangsters who are all in the Irish mob, continue their husbands' crimes after their husbands are sent to jail. It's the first film from, as a director, from Andrea Berloff. And she previously was Oscar nominated for co-writing the script for Straight Outta Compton. So this stars not only Tiffany Haddish, Melissa McCarthy, and Elizabeth Moss, as you said, but it's also got a really nice supporting cast in Domhnall Gleeson, James Badge Dale, Brian Darcy James, Jeremy Bobb, Margot Martindale, Bill Camp, Common. Like, it's just a really long list of people who are in the movie. Yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty rundown, and it's definitely dirty in this movie since it was New York in the 70s.
Yeah, definitely gritty and grimy. We're going to get into that and so much more. And we're ready to get critical on this movie. So, Kimber, you had the opportunity to screen the film for the review embargo, which for listeners who are and should be interested, you can find Kimber's review over at The Playlist. I, on the other hand, saw the film yesterday with like a fairly sparse audience and one person who forgot to turn off their phone, which is always so much fun. So, Kimber, what were kind of your initial thoughts on the movie, your guttural reaction as you were leaving the theater? Anything make you want to take over your New York neighborhood?
Well, I would love to take over my New York neighborhood, although mine is a good deal quieter than Hell's Kitchen in the 70s. Yeah, so my reaction walking out of the film was that should have been so much better. You have this cool concept of women leading in a mob movie. Women are always the wives. I don't know if I've really ever seen a film where, especially a group of women, is leading the charge and really just getting stuff done in terms of organized crime. And so I think that could have been a cool concept. And you have the fact that you have this great cast in Tiffany Haddish and Elizabeth Moss and Melissa McCarthy, as well as all of that like huge extended cast, and someone that had shown some promise previously as a screenwriter, making her directorial debut. I like that it was a woman directing a movie about women, and all of that I just did not pay off. Which was disappointing. I really wanted this to be a better film. I think mainly for me, the issue was the editing, which is not something that I feel like I usually call attention to in my reviews or when I'm watching a film. I think even in the critical mindset, it's not the first thing that comes to my brain. But if it does, as in this case, it's generally not a great sign. And here I felt like it was just scenes either went on too long or they were too short. It felt like there were things we were missing in the basic story and in the development of the characters, and it just felt very choppy and jarring. What was your response walking out, and what was the audience response? Like, I saw it with a packed theater that was both like critics as well as people who were just in for seeing a free movie. And it was kind of weird because I think people were expecting something funnier because of Melissa McCarthy and Tiffany Haddish. And so they were laughing at things that I don't think were intending to be funny. Yeah, it was not great, but at least it was a packed house. How was it with a less packed house?
Yeah, it was really fascinating. I think people were fairly involved throughout the whole run of the film. A lot of it, though, kind of like what you alluded to, I think people were uncomfortable in certain situations during the movie because they didn't know whether or not to laugh or to be kind of jarred by what they were seeing on screen, especially a lot of stuff that dealt with Elizabeth Moss's character Claire and Domhnall Gleeson's character Gabriel. There were like some things that people weren't really sure what to do, and in those uncomfortable moments, they just kind of started laughing a little bit to themselves. And yeah, on the more critical standpoints, I completely agree with you. I think we already talked about how we were on the same page. And yeah, I noticed the editing a lot too, really kind of made the story feel very lopsided, almost kind of rushed in some ways. And I think that was to the detriment of the cast and how, like, as you said, there was such a really great group of actors in this movie, and they were kind of disturbed by the very choppy editing. It felt very jarring to go from scenes between, I'm just thinking out loud of one scene that was really, really endearing and one of the lighter moments between Claire and Gabriel about them talking about their future to kind of having this whiplash take into the home of Kathy and her husband, Melissa McCarthy and Brian Darcy James, and kind of that very intense juxtaposition. And I think that maybe that was what Berloff might have been going for with some of those whiplash changes when it came to the editing. But a lot of it it didn't feel very cohesive. And I think a lot of that was to as I said, the detriment of getting to see these characters really kind of grow a little bit more. I think that Elizabeth Moss's character, Claire, had one of the better story arcs. And I really was so interested by Tiffany Haddish's character Ruby and where her narrative was going and how it all played out in the end. But I just felt like there wasn't that kind of shock that I was feeling by the end of the movie because everything just felt so kind of jarring and very choppy, like you said, throughout the movie.
Yeah, I think too, like I've seen several places and was wondering myself that there may have been an issue with the studio Warner Brothers actually like kind of wresting control in terms of the editing room. And so that may contribute to why it felt less cohesive and may also be not entirely the fault of Andrea Berloff and the editor, whose name I'm blanking on right now, but like he's a great editor. He did Moneyball and has really done great work in the past. So the question is like, where exactly did things go wrong for this? And I guess the answer is in a lot of places, but
yeah,
like even like I think a lot of the performances weren't the best from these people that we've seen be great before. I don't have an issue with Melissa McCarthy in particular going for drama. Like I think she's done it well in the past, kind of touching
so well in the past. Yeah.
Like, Can You Ever Forgive Me? The more dramatic moments of that were wonderful. Like I don't want to place the blame on her here, but I don't feel like she's particularly good here. And Tiffany Haddish, I think, was struggling a bit. And like I think part of that is like some of her lines could be read as more serious or as jokes, and so that was the challenge there. I thought what was interesting though is that in the source material in that comic book, her character was white, so they actually like changed a bit and added a bit more depth to the fact that like she was this outsider within the community, within her own family, or her in-laws rather. And the element that added, I thought, at least like as a concept, that was cool. But again, I don't feel like it was very well built out by the people here.
Yeah, that was one of the elements that really stuck out to me. And I think that, I completely agree that Haddish it really seemed like she was struggling at points with kind of delivery of some of those lines. And I definitely think that there is potential for her to harness her more dramatic powers. I think that The Kitchen really displays a good foundation for that. I think that she probably could have done with maybe a better or more developed script too, that didn't feel, some of the lines, like you were saying, it wasn't very clear whether some of them were meant to be delivered as jokes or whether they're meant to be delivered as threats. And I think that that really, whether it was a lack of direction or a lack of kind of feeling confident in what road to take, I think that that probably hindered a lot of the performance viability that she could have brought to the role, and definitely probably wavered the confidence too. But I really think that one of the major elements that I was left with was how not underdeveloped so much as not explored enough, that whole idea of Ruby being an outsider within this family. It always kept being alluded to, the racial politics of it all, and especially like considering the Irish mob and the history of how Irish people were treated in America's own history, and then how African Americans have been treated in America's history. It was just very. It was always like a quasi concept that never was fully fledged out, and it always felt like there was it was just kind of nibbling at this idea instead of going all in and taking like big bites out of it and making some really taking some risks with it. It felt like it was playing it very safe and just alluding to the idea of Ruby being this outsider and then kind of rising to the top, instead of just really going in and talking about how much more complicated those identities and changing the power structure really were.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's unfortunate because it's a movie that isn't afraid to go bold in other ways. Like it's pretty violent in places. It doesn't have that fear at all, but it certainly goes hard on the feminism. And like it feels like, I thought, a very like timely movie in that way, but it doesn't touches as much on the element of race, even as it just kind of like pokes at it throughout the film. And I wanted it to go a little bit harder and really dig into that, because that could have been a cool element. And whether the issue was it wasn't something that was present in the source material, so they weren't fleshing it out as much for whatever reason in the script, despite making that change in the casting. This one just like, it was rough throughout, and was I thought not a fun experience. Like it was pretty grim.
Yeah.
For much of it. And I think it's such a fun concept.
Definitely.
And I'm not saying that you can't have a very serious mob movie, because there certainly have been, but I think what tends to make films like Casino or Goodfellas or ones of that ilk more interesting to watch is there is a sense of fun and fearlessness, and both of those things were lost here.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also feel like throughout the film, it was trying to really figure out which path it was choosing to walk on, in terms of being a really fun, high octane, women running the mob world movie, and also having these elements of kind of like being very earnest about its feminism. It felt kind of very much like a feminism 101 kind of take. And I would have loved a lot more nuance instead of being very earnest and having, I think Melissa McCarthy at the end has this monologue where she talks about how she used to be so afraid as a woman walking in the streets, and now she doesn't have that fear anymore. And it felt very on the nose almost with the commentary. And I would have loved to see something a little bit more nuanced and fleshed out, and have some smaller moments that spoke just greater in terms of what the thesis of the film was and what the commentary was that it was trying to convey to its audience.
Yeah, I think the issue was it was all over the place, both in terms of messaging, in terms of tone. It was I think the performances felt like they were in different films. Like you said, I really wanted more of the, and really enjoyed the Elizabeth Moss, Domhnall Gleeson thread that felt like a different movie. So just to give,
definitely, yeah,
to give a bit of context for people who haven't seen the film yet, and I don't think we're necessarily recommending seeing the film, but Elizabeth Moss's character begins the film as a woman who is abused by her husband, who's played by Jeremy Bobb, who I don't think a lot of people know him by name. I sadly always have to look up his name, but he is great at always kind of playing the like smarmy, gross, like
yeah, he was recently in Russian Doll with Natasha Lyonne, and he played that very smarmy, kind of very vile character that Natasha Lyonne's character ends up hooking up with at the start of the series, and then we continue to see just how so gross and just so toxic and manipulative and gaslighting he is. He was also in Netflix's Godless, which I have yet to fully sit down and kind of immerse myself into. But yeah, he has a penchant for kind of getting into those very gross guys.
Yeah, he was on The Nick, which is excellent if people haven't seen it, which I can understand why people haven't seen it. It was on Cinemax, and it's not really widely accessed platform or channel. He was great there. I think he's also the big bad in this final season of Jessica Jones, which I haven't watched yet. So he's really good here, and he plays her abusive husband, Elizabeth Moss's abusive husband in the movie. And I feel like is the right response to that. But
it is definitely.
But he so he abuses her, and then he goes off to prison. And while he's there, she has this realization that she is capable of standing up for herself and capable of inflicting violence in the way that she was once the victim. And so she pairs with, it's really not super clear what her previous relationship with the Gabriel character
another
is.
Underdeveloped kind of part of the whole film is Gabriel's background.
Yeah. And not to say that I usually find Domhnall Gleeson unattractive, although I think like he certainly like can lean that way depending on who he's playing. I mean, I think his role in Star Wars is not meant to like set hearts aflutter. But here, and I usually am not like into the bad boys, but here, like, I don't know if it was a combination of the hair and his being like so supportive of Elizabeth Moss, but I was like, Domhnall Gleeson, he's a good one. Yeah, every time he was on screen, I was excited and was really just enjoying. And I think he was having fun too. I think the two of them are absolutely like the best part of this film.
Agreed. Yeah.
And Elizabeth Moss, I think, is having, I want to say a good year, but I mean, I guess like just a great career. But between this and Her Smell and obviously always Handmaid's Tale, she is just such an impressive actress and really gets to play a bit here, which is fun.
Yeah. And I think that actually just speaking to kind of the more underdeveloped parts of the film and kind of wanting more nuance, I actually felt like we were getting a little bit more from Claire's storyline and having those smaller moments. There's a part where in the movie, Gabriel is teaching Kathy and Ruby and Claire how to basically prepare a body to sink it in the river. And both Kathy and Ruby are just so disgusted by the whole idea of it. They can't watch it. And Claire stays there and is very intrigued. And she has this line where she looks at Gabriel and she says, "Can I do it?" And I just feel like in that just like very small moment, it just speaks so much louder about this huge turning point that she's having. And I also loved watching Elizabeth Moss's face in that little scene, and right next to Tiffany Haddish and Melissa McCarthy, and how just disgusted they were by what they were seeing and how composed and calm Elizabeth Moss was. It was such a really neat moment to see that kind of transition. And it was never really called to, it was just very subtly woven in. And you had to look at it if you were really going to see the effects. But it was really cool. And I think of the three, to see that major transition with Claire, having been this victim, a survivor of domestic abuse, and kind of coming into her own and realizing that she too can inflict even more so the kind of violence that her husband was capable of. It was a really fascinating narrative of the three to watch unfold.
Yeah, I think she absolutely does the most with what she's given, and I just speaks very, very well of Elisabeth Moss as an actress, and I think she just continues to be somebody who is always worth watching, no matter what she's in. Especially the small nuances of her facial performance are always great. Here, they're wonderful, and really in The Handmaid's Tale, she's doing.
It's like a master class in it.
She is so great. I always think, I'm like, oh, she was Zoe Bartlett on The West Wing, and it's been fun to kind of, I think we're of similar ages, and it's been fun to kind of grow up with her.
Yeah.
And just see, always a big Peggy fan on Mad Men, and love seeing.
And that transition too for that character was just so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also speaking of people that we loved watching in the movie, I really enjoyed Margot Martindale in the moments that she had in this movie. I would have loved to see more. I think that her whole little monologue about the Bible at the start of the movie was so funny and just so wild. And she too is someone, I think, in this movie who is kind of working with as much as she can with what is in the script, and kind of taking a little bit more risk with her performance, and being that very matriarchal figure who's almost like untouchable within this family. And I would have loved to see a little bit more of that. I don't know how much her character is developed in the source material either, but what were your thoughts on character actress Margot Martindale?
Yeah, so for a little bit of background, she plays the mother-in-law of Ruby, played by Tiffany Haddish, and is also kind of the matriarch within this Irish mob family. And I've seen a lot of people who weren't into her performance here, and who are normally big fans of Margot Martindale, saying that even she wasn't good here, and saying that that's one of the issues with the film, is that these talented people are not great in this film. And I was with you. I thought she was really fun. She is going big here, but in a way that I felt fit the character very well. And she,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, she reminded me a bit too. I saw a film that she was in earlier this year called Blow the Man Down, which played at Tribeca, which means that it will probably never see the light of day. But
R.I.P.
Yeah. And this was kind of a similar women doing crimes film. So it was interesting to see her in those kind of parallel roles, but seeing how she handled both of them differently. She is just always so good.
Yeah, I think that she's just so wickedly talented. And I guess I can see where a lot of other critics and pundits are coming from on her performance here. I think that just, going back to this kind of conversation that we've been having, I feel like the material and it felt like the script was kind of a first draft almost. I felt myself kind of not rolling my eyes, but a lot of the lines and phrases felt very almost contrived and cliched to me. I was trying to think of how many times I heard Melissa McCarthy say, "If you have a problem, you come to us," or something along those lines. And it felt very repetitive. It felt like that kind of feminism 101 on the nose commentary of saying things that were very kind of already shown, and not really didn't need to have that validation of being talked about over again. Yeah, I just, what were your thoughts on the script and how it was developed?
It was definitely a lot of telling and not showing.
Yeah.
Just everything was said so clearly and so bluntly. I felt like it lacked any sort of art in the in the script, which is unfortunate. I, again, just really thought that this would be more and better. There would be some nuance here, but there is absolutely nothing here in terms of subtlety. Like, it is just
you know what you're getting.
Head. Yeah, and I would expect more from this premise. I am curious. Obviously, with I would love to check out the source material and see how, like, are the lines just like cribbed directly from there, which I understand if what they were going for was kind of like a pulpy thing in the source material, that would make more sense. But here they never fully buy into that as what it's moving toward. And so, like, if it's going for something a little bit more artful, it certainly wasn't achieving that. So this was a real disappointment from start to finish. I do think it was interesting though, like in terms of, usually you have all of these women kind of in the background and these actresses you recognize but might not know their names. And here I thought that it was interesting to see that with the men. Like, I think Domhnall Gleeson is probably the biggest name of the men, but others of them are...
Common might be pretty up there too. Yeah.
See, that's a bad sign. Like, Common is so... that I forgot that Common was in this movie.
Yep.
And I love Common. So, he's in just a handful of scenes. The way that his character... So he's playing an FBI agent who initially sends the women's husbands to prison. And the way that his character, I don't even want to say evolves because that gives it too much credit, but
there really is no evolution there because we don't get to see enough of it. And then by the time we don't want to reveal the kind of quasi twist that they try to pull at the end, but by the time that twist is revealed in the third act, it almost feels like a Hail Mary of trying to pull something together to take a bigger risk for the film.
Yeah. But
because of how choppy it felt and how kind of out of left field the twist comes, it just felt very, the use of Common in the movie is just very underserved. It's very underserved and very frustrating too.
Yeah, I kind of feel like too, for how little they used him, they should have gotten someone that they could have paid less for. Because I mean, not that I think that Common is like asking for huge amounts of money in the movies that he's playing in. But he could have been a nobody here, and it wouldn't have mattered to the movie either way.
It almost felt like because it was Common, it was like the movie was calling attention to make sure you watch for this character because they are going to have some semblance of importance, even though they're barely in maybe 30 minutes of the movie.
But like, it's fascinating because you have all these other actors like Bill Camp, who's so great as this Italian mob man, Alfonso Cuarón. Bill Camp is also one of those actors that you always see places and may not know his name, but I think I am always impressed by him. And I thought he was actually one of the better parts of this, but it just like... I don't know what happened here. This is such a disaster. I'm really curious. So we're recording this on Sunday morning, right before box office numbers are released for the weekend, which for nerds is always an exciting time. But I can't imagine this will do particularly well this week. I'm looking at Friday's results, and The Kitchen was number 7. And this was a really big week for releases. You had Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, The Art of Racing in the Rain, Brian Banks. There were, I think, 5 movies that opened wide, which is huge, especially for August, and especially for, you have Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw from last week. So it is a crowded field out there, but this opening at number 7, at least as far as Friday was concerned, is not a good start. And looking at Cinema Score, this was also, I mean, like, critics have savaged this. I think it's in like the 20s on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, it's in the 30s on Metascore too, according to IMDb.
Yeah, not great numbers. And it doesn't appear to be one of those films where the critics hate it, but audiences love it. It has a B- cinema score, which is, I mean, like, while many people would be happy with a B-, at least I would have been in math. It's not it's not great for a cinema score. Like, most people give films that they're pretty happy with an A. Like, people are far less picky
Right.
than critics are in general. So a B- for this is not good and doesn't point to it being something that might rebound from having a ho-hum or bad first week, which I don't want to say that like this movie deserves, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's try to shift a little bit to some of the more positive aspects. I really
Yes.
like the costume work in this movie. I thought that was I loved seeing how the women continued to grow their jewelry collections
Yes.
over the course of the film. There's a really great scene where Melissa McCarthy is at a bar and you just see all of these rings that she has on her finger, and I was getting like visions of like the kind of archetypal mobsters of yore, and how they would always kind of decked out in their fancy rings and everything. So that was kind of cool. I would have loved to see like a little bit more not nuance, because I don't want to overuse that word, but a little bit more of a transition with some of their costumes. It was really cool to see Melissa McCarthy's hair change over the course of the film. I loved watching Tiffany Haddish's character kind of become a little bit more confident in the clothes that she was wearing and in her walk, and very physically she turned out some pretty good stuff. Elizabeth Moss, I was so focused on everything that was happening kind of internally with her character that I wasn't really paying attention so much to how she was physically changing and the clothes that she was wearing. Her hair also got a big glow up. I remember in the scene where they first meet the Italian mob boss out in Brooklyn. So what were some of your thoughts on kind of the craft and production value of the film?
Yeah, I thought that was actually one of the stronger elements. From the costumes looked great. I dug the like gritty streets of New York look of it. New York in the 70s was not, especially in that neighborhood, was not a pretty place.
Not a good look.
Yeah, now it's like
needed a glow up.
Exactly. Sure. Yeah, now for those unfamiliar with New York geography, it's just west of Times Square and is a very like safe part that is now very frequented by tourists going to and from the theater. And it's just a very different pre-Giuliani sort of neighborhood. And I liked what they did there with the look. Again, I agree with you on the costumes. The costumes are really cool and wish there could have been maybe a little bit more subtlety and evolution there, but loved watching that change. And it is like really fun and like plays with the like silhouettes and the fabrics of the time, and yet still is I think really beautiful in a lot of the work today. But yeah, the jewelry and the attention to jewelry was great. There's a moment where like I think Tiffany Haddish offers her character offers Melissa McCarthy's character a ring, and she's like, I already have one of those. It's like this is real power. But yeah, this was one where I struggled to find a lot of things that I liked outside of the craft and outside of the Elizabeth Moss and Domhnall Gleeson thread. But I wanted more.
Yeah, there was also, kind of walking backwards a little bit, there was also speaking to the grittiness of how the film looked. I always notice or try to pay attention to in some of these grittier gangster, mob, organized crime movies, how the camera kind of maneuvers these worlds. And while the look of Hell's Kitchen and New York was very gritty, I didn't get that same sense through the lens of the camera.
No.
And I was wondering if you could speak to, because your knowledge of some more of those organized crime films, having seen Casino and what have you, might be a little bit more developed than mine is. So what were your thoughts on kind of seeing the grittiness of New York, but not feeling it so much in the way that the camera was capturing it?
No, I think that's a great way of describing it. Like it is very much I'm trying to think of how to describe the fact that it is so much present in what you're seeing, but not how you're seeing it.
Completely agree. That's a great way to put it too.
Which is is another just unfortunate thing that I think like this movie at each point could have been something better. It's not one of those films where you really feel like from the start this was going to be a disaster. Like the concept is cool, the cast is cool, but
you have all the elements working.
Yeah, and in its execution, it just falls so short. And the DP here is, and I hope I don't mispronounce her name, but Maryse Alberti. It's like Mary C. I can't really, but she's been great before. Like she's worked with Todd Haynes on Velvet Goldmine. She did The Wrestler.
Which had a great distinctive look, The Wrestler did.
Yeah, she did Creed, which had some amazing work, especially in the ring. But here, I felt like it could have been shot by anyone. There wasn't really anything super distinctive about it. And when you have an era and a setting that really begged for so much style, and this just didn't have it.
Yeah, I was almost kind of wanting a look that was almost akin to like Taxi Driver, and how that movie was so grimy, and you could almost like feel the mold and the condensation on the wallpaper, and feel the condensation when you were outside and in the cab. But here it just felt very much more like observational and not within that world, if that makes any semblance of sense.
No, it makes total sense. I think like there's not a lot of visual texture, and it just makes so little sense that within this time when there was so much texture, both within obviously the clothing, but also within the city, you just don't get a lot of that here.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like we're kind of wrapping up our conversation on The Kitchen now. And I think that about sums it up for our critiques of the film. So Kimber, what's your final grade for The Kitchen?
My final grade would be a C minus, which I think is perhaps even a little bit generous. That was what I gave to my my playlist review. It is like a C minus D plus, which makes me sad. I do want to give a quick shout out though. They are very different movies, but if you want to see women doing crimes in the absence of their criminal husbands, Widows is streaming now.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. On HBO, right?
It's on HBO. It is absolutely worth checking out. I think it was one of the overlooked films of last year, and really does a great job of balancing kind of a grimness about what is actually being done and the pain that these women have. In this case, their husbands were not sent to prison. They were killed. And so there's real mourning there, which I think is interesting, but there is still a sense of fun and glee in what they're doing. And so that's directed by Steve McQueen and stars Viola Davis and Colin Farrell and all kinds of
another stacked cast that's really used to its highest powers in that movie.
Absolutely. So yeah, please, I mean, like, I don't want to say don't see The Kitchen, but if you're deciding between staying home and watching Widows or going out and seeing The Kitchen, stay home and watch Widows. You will not regret it.
Yeah, I definitely want to give a shout out to, I think, one of our mutual favorite writers, Candace Frederick, who actually brought up Widows on Twitter during this past week, talking about how seeing adverts for The Kitchen and then going back and thinking about how so underserved Widows was last year in terms of its recognition and how much critics loved it, but audiences just didn't seem to be pushed enough to go and see the film. Catch up on it now. It was one of my favorite movies of last year. So totally recommend that. But we're still on The Kitchen right now. And I completely agree with you, Kimber. I think that my final grade for the movie, I was kind of hopping between a C and C minus, which kind of, as you alluded to, is still pretty generous. I feel like it's just very disappointing because I felt like there were so many elements that were so exciting to see here. And like you said, the final execution just was really disappointing. And I really wanted to like more of the movie. I really appreciated a lot of the needle drops because I'm a big fan of 70s music, that late 70s era going into the 80s. But yeah, it was a really tough one. I think I'm going to agree with you and also give this one a C minus. Just so much potential that I feel like just never was seen to fruition. But we don't want to forget that we are but two ladies who love to write and talk about movies. So you can check out these reviews from other women and women of color writers, Stephanie Zacharek over at Time Magazine, Anne Donahue at IndieWire, Joy Childs at Stylecaster, Karen Peterson at Award Circuit, Courtney Howard at Fresh Fiction, Karen Hahn at Polygon, and Ingu Kang at Slate. Before we head out to run the town, Kimber, where can we find your upcoming and regular work?
I am always on the LA Times and the Playlist, seeing all kinds of good and terrible movies.
And you can find my work regularly at The Playlist, Polygon, Film School Rejects, Zimbio, and of course, Cinemaholics. All right, from the deep and the gritty bowels of the internet Hell's Kitchen, this has been Julia and Kimber taking care of business on Cinemaholics. Thank you guys so much for listening.